The Chinese military is tough on the outside but weak on the inside. There are a lot of worms inside the military.
Has the Chinese military lost its glory? In an unexpected move, a senior Chinese military official has downgraded the People's Liberation Army's widely reported real combat-oriented exercises as fake combat capabilities. It must have been shocking to the people who kept a close eye on the Chinese military and its operations. After all, no one ever imagined the Chinese would fake it for the real despite being the market leaders in the production of fake goods. So, why is the Chinese military faking its way out? According to meeting minutes made available to the media, General He Weidong, the second-ranked vice chairman of China's powerful Central Military Commission, the overall high command of the three armed forces headed by the President Xi Jinping, made these comments during a discussion with a delegation from the People's Liberation Army. The Chinese military, at all levels, has been conducting live drills in which they divide their personnel into two groups to evaluate their battle readiness since Xi took office. According to analysts, Gen He, the third-ranking military officer in China, sent out a brief and ambiguous message that may have something to do with purchase of subpar equipment, as well as rank-by-rank lying during training. Early this week, the Chinese government increased the defense budget by 7.2% to USD 232 billion as it continues to modernize its military extensively in the face of ongoing tensions over Taiwan, the South China Sea dispute, border disputes with India, and growing US rivalry. When talking about the fake combat ability of the Chinese military, it reminds us that the majority of Chinese objectives that are in conflict with the US and other countries are territorial rather than global or ideological. Is China staging these fake battles to intimidate the United States and its neighbors, including Taiwan? There are several reasons to answer these queries. The People's Republic of China fired missiles off the coast of Taiwan in 1995 and again in 1996. Additionally, despite being hundreds of miles off China's coast, China claims the Spratly Islands, which it strengthened with military installations. In contrast to President Jiang Zemin's purported objective of unifying Taiwan with the Chinese mainland during his term in office, the PRC has been steadily amassing short-range missiles against Taiwan in recent times. This trend is hardly positive, it seems, and now the espionage claims in the Cox investigation by the US on Chinese covert operations that have added a fresh urgency to these considerations. As you may have seen, the PRC has demonstrated a number of intentions and objectives recently that have required serious attention on the part of the United States. For instance, we might reconsider the situation of Taiwan, about which we are all constantly informed about its ongoing conflict with China. In actuality, China's goals in this regard are not the same as those of the US or other countries that surround the South China Sea. China has actually been continuously criticizing the foreign policies of the United States and their assertiveness. The US government has not taken this well. We can infer from all of these issues that the Beijing administration is hoping to use its economic might to convert into military and geopolitical clout, but many have a feeling that these aspirations by China are over-exaggerated. China has 2.8 million soldiers, sailors, and airmen, more than twice as many as the United States, making it the military powerhouse of the world. Despite such high manpower, why is the Chinese military losing the plot? Before the PRC authorities realized that the size of the China's military actually hindered their goal of building a modern force, China's military was 1 million people stronger in the 1980s. The raw size is misleading. Of China's 2 million soldiers, the majority are in the ground forces, where their main duties are border protection and internal order maintenance rather than power projection. Furthermore, according to Pentagon estimates, only approximately 20% of those ground forces are outfitted with enough weapons to operate inside China. The trucks, maintenance centers, engineering and construction teams, and other mobile assets required to project power overseas are owned by an even smaller number of people. Admiral Dennis Blair, the newly appointed Chief of Staff for the United States Pacific Forces, has stated that China will not pose a significant strategic danger to the country for at least 20 years in light of these realities. China's armed forces are at least 2 decades behind the US military in almost every regard. In many cases, they can even perform poorly when compared to the hollow force that the US fielded immediately following the Vietnam War. Furthermore, China's military is in far worse condition when it comes to issues like training and logistics, troop morale, and the professionalism of its officer corps. If you notice, after the United States spent USD 886 billion on its military last year, China is the second biggest spender behind the US. There is more to China's ever-growing defense budget than meets the eye. It has increased by more than 50% in real terms throughout the 1990s and is expected to rise by 15% this year. What does this tell us? The Chinese armed services received a large portion of this year's rise as compensation for giving up their numerous commercial ventures, which reduced China's military readiness. China's declared defense budget, even with these increases, will only come to roughly $12 billion, or less than 5% of the US amount. Of course, Chinese military spending is not fully represented by that $12 billion amount. It excludes funding for local militias, most of China's military research, nuclear weapons development, and acquisitions of armaments from elsewhere. It also doesn't take into consideration administrative expenses like retirement and demobilization or subsidies to China's faltering defense sectors. After accounting for these additions and correcting for the impacts of buying power parity, which is a challenging and imprecise process, China's actual defense spending is typically estimated to be between $35 billion and $65 billion annually. However, these are relatively low figures, particularly given the size of the military. China supports a force twice as large as the United States but spends less than 25% of its defense budget, even at the higher estimates. This fundamental discrepancy won't alter very soon. First, as previously mentioned, China has significant economic difficulties that prevent it from funding a military buildup. Secondly, China is starting from a position of considerable disadvantage even if it does manage to reduce the gap with the United States. China's capital stock of modern military hardware is far less than $100 billion, whereas the United States is close to $1 trillion. There have been a lot of conclusions drawn from more through evaluations of China's military preparedness and capacity, and among them is the poor preparedness of the Chinese Air Force. What do you think the Chinese Air Force is lacking? Take the Combat Air Force of China. Despite nearly matching the total air strength of the United States, China's air forces only have a few hundred third generation and a few dozen so-called fourth generation combat aircrafts. The rest rely on technologies from the 1960s or even before. In contrast, every one of the more than 3,000 fighters in the US Air Force, Navy, and Marines is a fourth generation type. By 2005, China is predicted to have about 150 fighters in its fourth generation arsenal. By then, the US would have acquired 300 fifth generation aircrafts. An even more dire evaluation is produced by two further factors: auxiliary gear and general military preparedness. First, a recent Pentagon analysis noted that the air forces of the People's Republic of China had limited capacity for aerial refueling, subpar observation aircraft, and an unfinished program to acquire airborne warning and control aircraft. Secondly, the PRC Air Force's electronic warfare capabilities are extremely limited by Western standards, according to another Pentagon analysis. China is now implementing programs aimed at enhancing specific specialist skills, including long-range precision strikes, space utilization, and other strategic dimensions of warfare. However, the PRC is still having problems updating its military. It is frequently best to think of what is passed off in the literature as capabilities as long-term goals. Is it okay if you don't know where the Cox Committee report ended up? However, the report has expressed grave concerns regarding China's military capabilities. Despite their fake combat capabilities, are there other factors ailing the Chinese military? What are they? The Chinese military merely lacks quality. Since most of its members are ground force troops, it would be more accurate to characterize them as internal security personnel, given their absence of transportation and mobile logistical resources. Their preparation is mediocre to non-existent. Furthermore, the armed forces continue to draw few of China's most intelligent residents and suffer from low pay, cronyism, and party favoritism. Significant limitations also limit the PRC's ability to project power, particularly when it comes to air and amphibious assault capabilities, electronic warfare, aerial refueling, and command and control. China holds even less advanced military hardware than smaller nations like Italy, South Korea, or the Netherlands, and far less than medium-sized powers like Japan and the United Kingdom. It hasn't even made a deliberate attempt at buying cutting-edge new weaponry, although some observers peg China's annual military budget at as high as $65 billion in terms of purchasing power. Notwithstanding the many shortcomings of its armed forces, China is a developing nation that might pose a serious threat to the US and its allies in East Asia in the future. Do you think the CCP in China is slowly losing its grip on its military power? Do share your thoughts on this in the comment section. For more interesting stories and updates, subscribe to our channel and do not forget to press the bell icon for notifications. Goodbye.